Good morning and welcome. It's a typical Brussels morning. What else can I say? I think that's it. But welcome to the session of the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. And this is it's not a new beginning, but the beginning for us because it's an important moment. It's a moment that we have worked extremely hard for the last few months, and that we hope that it resulted in something that is interesting. We are here for the new initiative that ERCST has started now for a few months, the future of emissions trading in the EU, and we are launching today under this initiative the first report. We have the way we proceed in this is that we will make the presentation first, and then we have distinguished panelists that you all know, Medic Quinn from the European Commission, and Commission is a busy body these days, so we appreciate you taking the time. I always say this: we never take the presence of the Commission for granted. We work hard to earn it. Fabio Poretti, Fabio, welcome, and Julia Michalak, an old colleague from AIDA, and I'm happy that Julia could also join us. Also, I believe that on the screen somewhere should be Jean-Pierre de Bruxelles from Fuels Europe and Claudia Gibbs from the German Minister, German government. So I hope that they are there. I see Claudia is there. I don't see Jean-Pierre. So maybe somebody can get on the phone to Jean-Pierre and make sure that he is there and he has the link. 5 years later, after COVID and Zoom, we're still looking for links and electronic ways of doing it. So this is for us an initiative that we have started again in June. It's results in a number of reports. I'll go into this, and in a way, it is complementary to what we have been doing for the last number of years, 7, 8 years, and that is a flagship report of ERCST, which is the State of the ETS report, something that we publish every April, May, depending on how fast we move. Now, what I'd like to do is, without much ado, I'd like to start running you through the presentation, and then we'll go and get the reactions from our distinguished panelists. So first, what I would like to say is that this all started, as many of these things start, in a very innocent way, on the margins of a meeting. I think it was an EDF meeting, I believe, and running into a few of the associations talking about, the ETS and how it's progressing and how it's going to progress. And one thing led to the other. Somebody said, "But you guys have been doing work on this," and I said, "Yes." And he said, "Why don't you look into this in the future?" And I said, "Yes." And the whole thing kind of took a life of its own. And in the end, what we find extremely, if you want, rewarding and refreshing, and something that makes us very happy because we haven't done this before, that this is an initiative. The overall initiative is to look to have the support of the large industrial association and the power association in Brussels. Many of them are in the room today. I'm not gonna. They are in the report, but you know them all. Whether it's Fertilizers or CEFIC or Eurofer or Eurelectric, but also a number of companies. ENEL or EDF or the number of them. But also, what is also important, support from number of member states. So we have received the support from the governments of France, Germany, Denmark, and Poland. As you can see, we tried to diversify to make sure that nobody has a preponderance of weight or influence on what we do. We have formed an advisory group, which all the organizations that are supporting us, and we emphasize that this initiative is supported by all these nice organizations, and we thank them very, very much for the trust they put into us. But we do guard our independence with jealousy, and that is quite clear. This is our work, our reports. We obviously listen intensively and we listen with great care to what they have to say, but in the end, we take responsibility to now. If you can start go to the slide. So the future of the ETS. So the future of the emissions trading in the EU, we didn't call it the future of the ETS because people think of the ETS as ETS1, and it gets very confusing. One of the things that we really struggled over the last 2 weeks is how to name these things and to make it clear. At some point, you even had ETSX, and then we thought it was a stupid idea. But the future of emissions trading in the EU is a project that provides for analytical insight, challenges, propose a solution for the evolution of the emissions trading in the EU in phase 4, second part of phase 4, and the post 2030. Now, you know ERCST, you know me, we have been strong supporters of emissions trading. I don't think there's anything to say about that. You all know that, and there's no hiding. I mean, we are ideological, we are supportive of emissions trading, end of story. And the same thing, we're concerned about industrial Europe, but we are concerned that we like emissions trading. So yes, we do start with that mindset. And if you want to fault us in that, yes, but we're human beings and we have opinion. Now, the project was kicked off in June 2024. At that point, we had a number of discussions with all these supporters. Maybe wanted to make sure that everybody kind of eyeballed everybody and everybody was quite clear what they were getting into, etc., etc. So we have agreed that we will address a number of issues as part of the report. First of all, the coverage. Second thing is the role of emissions trading in EU climate policy, price signal and competitiveness, carbon removals, agriculture, market functioning, architecture, and governance. I would say that it's been a little bit of a negotiating list of priorities. I have to admit to that. But I do think that, in the end, in the beginning, we had a long list of 12, 15, I can't remember what it was. It was unrealistic to do that many, especially the way we work and we have worked on this particular report that we present to you today, is that we start with a blue sky session, we have a stakeholder engagement, and then so if you do 15 of these reports and then you do this kind of iteration, you end up in Christmas 2028, and that's a little bit too long. And we know there is a timeline. There's a 2040 target. The 2040 target is going to imply some review, some thinking on the part of the European institutions. So we wanted to be, if you want, in time for that reflection. We thought that was important. But then the other thing that we looked at is how do we arrange it? How do we look at it? In what order do we look at it? And my instinct was, to tell you the truth, because everybody thinks differently, but I'm an engineer and I think from the simple to the complex. Well, I would have preferred to have started with the discrete things such as removals, agriculture, things of that, price signals, things of that sort. But in the end, the consensus was that we'll start from the more general to the broad and then go to the other. It creates a bit of a problem, as you will see in the report, because we had to kind of do a fair bit of analysis in each of the sectors, as opposed to having to refer to previous reports, which would have been a little bit more logical. But anyway, the conclusion was we started with the coverage of emissions trading in the EU. That is the first one, and this is the report that we're launching today. We've been working, by the way, we have been working on this report since July, with somewhere in between, yes, somewhere in between, and in some you think you have a lot of time. We started with the idea that this is going to be like a 30-page report because nobody's going to read more. Well, it ended up, which is very unique for us, to the 100-page report, and it's not the best idea. I fully admit we got ourselves into a bit of a tip, because The more we talk to people, everybody say, well, you have to mention this, you have to talk to this, but keep it short. So you have to mention this, you have to mention this in the end, you can't have it both ways. So, now, the background of this is that the review of emission trading, the review of how the architecture emerged through the green expansion is an issue that has been increasing urgency. Our colleagues, our friends in the commission have had their own initial reflection, and they have commissioned organizations to work with them and provide that kind of initial thinking. That is the first thing. I think that, I don't think the commission understand there's going to be future reflection on this. We're very happy to contribute to this work through that reflection. We think that ETS1, which we call ETS1, the ETS, the one that we all know and love, has become effective and gained new impetus. That, ETS1 for many years has kind of languished at €5. It was not what anybody wanted. Now that has changed now for a number of years. So it is now something that really is doing what we thought it was going to do, and it's, we hope it's going to do even more. The fact that, markets, this is a regulatory market, and it has it requires some stability. In general, we see markets like stability, predictability. There's nothing that will make certainty, but stability and security. And it takes time. The European system, the European governance requires time every time you make changes. Whether we like it or not, it took me a few years to get used to the European governance system, and I realized this is not the many ways around that. The fact that we are entering the new territory, and the new territory is the fact that, yes, we are, we're going to go to 2040, but it's going to be 85, 95, 90, whatever it's going to be. But we're certainly beginning to look into very, very strong targets, increasingly strong targets. And the fact that as you go into the increasingly strong targets, my thesis is, and my work by that thesis, I think I've spoken to people in the market, if we continue this way and we presumably run out of credit by 2039, I would say that the traders are going to start counting liquidity by 2035 or so. So it is a concern. You can't discount that. It's 10 years from now. It's not 50 years from now. Something we need to think about. It's not a drama, but it's something that we need to think about. And the regulators thinking about these things. So what we are doing in this paper is looking at the scope expansion. Obviously something that has been in the cards and something that people have discussed about. And we have looked at sectoral scope expansion, and geographical scope expansion, and system scope expansion in the sense of international credit. We regarded some of these changes as for our own identification. We regarded some of these as evolutionary, some of them are revolutionary, and whether that's if you want a subjective categorization, we wanted to do that. Next slide. Now, one of the comments that we had when we were writing this report and saying, so guys, you're not giving a sense of urgency. Why is this important? Maybe it's not. Maybe there's no urgency to the whole thing. And so why considering the ETS expansion? One is that in some sector there may not be direct or indirect policy impacting the level of GHG emissions. Agriculture is an example. There is some policy there, but by and large, it hasn't been touched by the effort to reach net zero. Some sectors are doing better, some sectors are doing less better in doing and reducing GHG emissions. We do want a EU-wide harmonized approach, and I think that the ETS has been the one policy that has been quite successful, at least in what I do in life in that. We have the new target that will require some adjustment, improvement in market functioning, and I mentioned, I think there is going to be a liquidity issue somewhere in the mid-30s. We believe continue to make sure that we do this in the most efficient way. And the fact that as the more this is hitting home, is the more it's going to create social tension. I mean, this is a reality. It's not something that we want to highlight as a negative necessarily. It's something that we need to acknowledge and be able to address it. So next, please. Now, the one thing that we also tried, we tried to, can you go to the next slide? The next slide is the one there. So the one thing that we did in going through the various sectors or different chapters of this saga, one of the things that we did, we tried to think a little bit to organize and have some kind of a template because they're very different. Some of them are sectors, and some of them will be geographical expansion or international credits or whatever it is. So it doesn't gases. So it is difficult to produce something that's somehow coherent. So the area that we decided to cover under each of these chapters, one of them is the current status. What are we? The timelines, kind of what kind of timeline we're looking at in terms of anticipated chronology of expansion. Looking at scenarios, how can we see this, at least that it could happen? Two things, one of them is impact on supply-demand balance, which is equal prices. How would this impact prices? Not an easy thing to do. Again, I also want to emphasize the fact that we made it quite clear we're not going to do modeling. We simply did not have the ability and the resources to do modeling for all these things. And the other one is impact on market functioning. And finally, the last section on discussion, and there's some recommendations that we did for better or for worse. So this is kind of the background, and then we went through a number of sectors. And if you want to go to the next slide. Yes. So I think that for me to run you through this whole thing, I think is probably not an easy target. You make this happen, and then this thing lets you down. Right? What can I say? It's just the way it is. Okay, there you go. Okay, so this is a table that you will find in the report. It is 105 pages. Some at the end is under Outlook, and it basically outlines for us the most likely scenario. We did something that is a little bit strange. We had two categories. One of them is most likely scenario, and the other one was recommendations. In principle, if we see the most likely, should be also recommendation, but not necessarily. There's certain things that may happen that we think may happen because of the reality. There's certain things that we would like to happen, or we think that should happen. And we made the difference between the two. So what you see in here is the sector, the area of expansion in the case of municipal waste, the likely emission trading system to the EU where it would be integrated, and that would be, in our view, ETS 1. When would this happen? I think for reason we said that it'd be high likelihood in 2028. And we would see this as a positive in both in the supply balance column as well as in market functioning. So going down this whole area, this is the kind of judgment that we thought would happen. Some people will be happy about some of the pluses and minuses. Some people may not be so happy. But again, the areas that we looked at, municipal waste, international aviation, maritime, small energy, industry installation, agriculture, non-CO2 emissions, negative emission, geographical expansion, which is linking, and international linking. And sorry, geographical expansion, which is kind of new member states in the EU, international linking, and international credits. We made the difference between international linking between ETS and credit. I think that's probably a logical thing to do. At least that's the way we did it. So this is the if you want, these are the areas that we did. I will only take as an example, or if you go to the next page in agriculture. Yeah. Okay, no, go to the agriculture before there.
Next one.
Next one. Next one. Here we go. For instance, in agriculture, we looked at this as say, listen, I mean, agriculture, you can do agriculture in a number of ways. You can do it in the upstream with the farmers, but we saw the farmers in Brussels. You can do it downstream at a supermarket. You can do it midstream as agribusiness. And for a variety of reasons, some of them economic, some administrative or political, we felt that it's likely to be a midstream operation. I think that's what we think, maybe right or wrong. We saw that initially it's probably going to be a separate ETS ag. That's the way we saw it. It's not going to happen until 2030. Medium to high probability. Look, we can't do net zero without agriculture. I mean, I don't want to pay more for my steak, but that's the reality. That is God's honest truth. I just don't see how this is going to happen. And you're going to have to look at something this Europe-wide. So you start with the levy, you start with the emission trading system. The EU likes emission trading. And I think that to us sounds like a logical thing that is going to happen. We don't see that this is going to impact, at least at the beginning, the rest of the ETS1 and ETS2 that we have. So this is kind of the logic that we went through the various sectors and the various you will see negative emissions. Negative emissions for us is also a very important element. I think that we struggled a lot with negative emissions. The difference between CCS and CDR, which eludes me, but this is the language is being used, and we use the same language as is being used in the discourse in Brussels. We made it quite clear that we're looking more into permanence. That's an important element. We look at it that probably is going to be into ETS1 if it comes in. But I personally see no reason why ETS2 is not also be in some fashion. Probably it's not going to happen before 2030. We would like to happen earlier. That's a different story, but I think realistically it's going to happen. And we think they're positive. We think it will be a positive for the market, if nothing else. At some point, you're going to get to net zero and then negative. You do need the stuff, and there's no reason to wait. At least that would be our view. But there's also a political reality in this town where ERCST, Belena's not here, Belena now is co-chairing the public perception on CDR, and we know that there are strong feelings in Europe on CDR. It may not be so easy, but we do think that this is an important element. I'm not going to take you through all of them because we don't have the time to do so. You do have 105 pages to read if you want over the weekend. But this is kind of the essence of what we were prepared to show. Now, if you want to move on, because then we go into what we call the takeaways or the recommendations. And again, we are blind right now, maybe because we don't see the screen, so apologies for that. The intention was good. We brought the screen, but obviously the screen collapsed. So in terms of takeaways or recommendation, this is what we think, what we would like, but that's a difference, a world difference. Now is the municipal waste incineration landfills. We see this in ETS1 in 2028, and that seems to make sense. There are aspects that will need to be managed, including the interaction, the whole value chain, environmental implication, interlinkages in different files, etc., cost-through mechanism. So this is the way we would see municipal waste incinerations. I'm probably unsure that you're ready to provide this, your views on that. On international aviation, which is the next section that you'll find in our report, coverage of international departing flights rather than departing and arriving in line with what can be considered the EU fair share of emissions, conditional on no double burden with CORSIA. We know there's a 2026 review of CORSIA in the EU, so this is important. Extra EU flights and domestic aviation in a separate emission trading system separate system could become the main decarbonization driver, or we could do it in the ETS1. Now, ideally, and we had strong discussion on this. Ideally, my friends who are economists, who I'm not an economist, I'm a dilettante, made the case that this would probably, from a point of view of an emission reduction tool, probably would be good. But I made the case that there's a president of the commission who seems to say in her letter that we're going to, as much as we can, to one CO2 market integrated. At least that's what the letter to Commissioner Hoekstra said. So we took that seriously, and we saw that then there is a desire that things would, rather than create 50 of them, that you would create as much as possible, amalgamate them on one, use of them. So this is what we saw, that the option of ETS, this extra EEX lighting, ETS1, is probably something that we would like to see in the end. And maritime, we had been sorry. Okay, maritime, we maintain the 50% scope with respect to international maritime voyage emission in the absence of international progress, includes smaller vessels after the transition period, and the possible inclusion of the maritime sector in a separate emission trade system in the EU, possibly together with aviation, warrants some level of assessment. With the smaller energy and industry installations, ERCST will see the inclusion of smaller installation in ETS2 and installations below 20 megawatts total rated thermal input as a likely scenario. It's something that we think we'd like to see happen. The integration of the first group will depend on the success of ETS2, and ETS2, in our view, is still a system to be tested. It's a new system. There was a lot of discussion about the creation of ETS2. I think we can't ignore the fact that there's going, as prices may hit home, there's going to be some forks into this. So to what degree that is going to happen so fast that you can also bring something new, is something that we're going to think about. We talked about agriculture, ETS agriculture. That's the next slide, I think slide 10, as a separate system is at least an option to be explored. We mentioned that, but if the EU want to decarbonize by 2050, probably this is the best way at EU level, and the way we would see it, that there should be, as I mentioned, would be a midstream, and it will happen probably in the early 30s or somewhere, as we know, but not before the end of the decade. The non-CO2 emission in aviation, which is section 3 in the report, is including non-CO2 aviation in the US directive, would be at this stage premature. There is still a lot of need for better understanding, including trade-offs to CO2. And there is probably likely to be better understanding by the end of the decade, giving at the same time aircraft operators sufficient time to equip aircraft with the relevant equipment. So this would be our take on non-CO2 emission in agriculture. Negative emissions, which we have spent quite a bit of time. We see CDR in ETS as a solution that requires and warrants exploration and will require a legislative framework. There are a lot of discussion. There is CCS has a way of gaining value and has get that value from recognition in ETS. We've seen some of the papers that Otmar and Hopper and Artur and other people have written. And yes, we do think this is an important element. So we do not get into the technical feasibility if these things are not feasible, are not commercially possible. This is something that, in our view, is something that clearly is going to be an impediment. That is not going to work. But at this point, we don't see any reason why we should wait for this. I think that in my mind, at least, a lot of the value chain is similar to what we have in CCS. We see that there are different ways that you can do this. You can introduce this as a crediting mechanism. You can introduce it in a gradual way. You can introduce it together with the CEPI in order to have a price converted. There's a number of ways that you can do this. But I think that is something that we should start for the simple reason that it is something that would also take time. And, when you introduce new elements in the ETS, it's something that you do need time for it to understand the course. What we learned if you learn anything from ETS is that the theory is great, but the practice, and we've learned the hard way because, many of us have been in this business now of ETS for 20 years, probably not more. And we've learned a lot and we made a lot of changes. And I think that introducing new elements such as this, especially negative emissions. Now, negative emissions until you reach 20, until you net zero, I know how to do. If you accept it, you get allowances. I don't know what you do, maybe credits, whatever. When you get into but I know who has the obligation, because there are people with emissions. What happened in the net zero, then who's got the obligation? That becomes a different kettle of fish. So I think there needs to be some thinking as to how that works. Now, is it dramatic that it has to happen tomorrow morning? No, but the more time we have, I think the better off we are. Now, for geographical expansion, which is the next slide, we looked at this and, there's an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is called Ukraine. And yes, Ukraine is on the list of countries to join at some point the EU. Clearly, this is not a decision that rests on ETS. They're much bigger fish to fry than ETS in relation to Ukraine. But if it happens, ETS is going to be part of the acquis. That goes without saying. And it's difficult to understand how this would quite work. We also happen to work on part of the design or some of the idea for the design of ETS in Ukraine. And it's a country that is has been embroiled in a very, very unfortunate and drastic situation. And that is very difficult to understand how the country would look like. You can have different scenarios when you rebuild because you want to rebuild very quickly, in which case you're in a certain place on the map curve. You can be very, very, very green and very, very efficient, which will happen, in which case you're very high on the map curve. But if you were to introduce it, all of a sudden the impact is going to be very different. The other thing that we can think about is Ukraine has a very, very serious agricultural sector. It's not for the faint of heart. This is a very serious, Ukraine is the granary of the world in many ways, very rich black soil. And so it's a significant sector. Now, if you introduce it and you have a new agriculture and you introduce the Ukrainian agriculture, how this is going to work? I don't know much about the Ukrainian agricultural sector, but we have Natalia Kruchko who works with us in Ukrainians and tells me that actually the Ukrainian agricultural sector is quite advanced and quite efficient. That's what she tells me. So it will be very different. So we do think that this is something that is going to have to be considered very seriously. And this thing is not comparable to Croatia or anything like this for the simple side. It's a very different size. But again, is it going to happen today? No, I think there'll be some time. We need to think about it, and it's going to depend on other factors. International linking, Dirk, I have a very old slide, Julia, of Dirk Forrester. He said, I don't know, we put two systems and then we put a third system and a fourth system. And then he said, at the end, this is Nirvana, we have a global emission trading system. Well, 25 years later, after Dirk and I were having beers talking about this, we're still linked to the Swiss. And we have the Norwegian, etc. So this is our dream. It's always been our dream, and this was the dream that we would deal with carbon leakage and so on. But we're in the reality, and the reality is that if we learn that it is a very contingent issue, linking, because of process that you have to go through, and the fact that you Mullins, you do part of what you can do alone. If you leave the United States and China, for argument's sake, all of a sudden you can't make energy decision completely separate in terms of carbon. And carbon is presumably the arbitrage between different sources of energy. So I think that we saw that in the end, the real reality of linking will be with countries that are in the vicinity and countries with whom we have strong economic and governance relationship in some way. And that's why we saw, I mean, the UK, obviously a logical candidate, they left us, but they will come back. Meanwhile, I think there is a strong clamor from many industry and many business and many in the UK and the EU. Why are we doing this whole CBAM in the UK? Why don't you just link the emission trading system, guys, and get it over with? And I think that, you know, politically, we understand what it is and the difficulties, but in the end, if there is a candidate, it's got to be the UK, because it's like a logical thing to happen. The systems are not horribly different. I don't think I think it can be done. The other candidates that we see in the neighborhood is probably somewhere in the Western Balkans with a session in the geographical expansion or through linking. And the last one that we see is Turkey. Turkey is in the process. They're having promises in emission trading system. They said 2026. My latest information is that they have awarded the tender for the design of the ETS, but it hasn't really started yet. So I don't see how they're going to do this in 2026, but hopefully they'll do it. Given the strong economic relationship that we have with Turkey and the status of Turkey, which is nothing with the candidate, I believe, but I think we have a I can't remember what there is a special relationship. I think it's something that obviously you will have to think about it in the future, but again, not something that you need to think. In terms of international credit and linking, international credits, my favorite topic and the one that Yvonne always tells me to go away is I think that it's a contentious issue in the EU. My firm belief is that the international side of the linking that we had in the EU got a bad name undeservedly. That's my personal view, and I hold on to it. Nothing is but I think that it is not. I believe that it would be not well portrayed, but we are where we are. And my sense, the sense that we have is that thinking of introducing Chinese wind farms in Article 6 in the EU is probably not something that's going to happen very soon, or I'm not sure there's a level of enthusiasm in this. But it's quite clear that also, at least, you know, I take the president quite seriously. I quote in the paper speech that President van der Leyen gave in Nairobi, I think last year, with the president of Kenya, saying that this is still international credits are an important thing. So I think there's going to be probably some interest. There's interest also from many of the multilateral development institutions. Probably if there is something, it's probably going to be focused, at least in our expectation, is going to be focused probably more on land and removals. It's probably going to use a lot of conditionality in terms of price convergence and making sure that we're not getting things that are super cheap. So there are going to be all kinds of mechanisms to ensure that that is not happening. But is this something that will be considered? I know it's not, you know, if you look on the agenda of the European institution, I don't think it's on the agenda right now. But, you know, you never say never. So I think that as we go into a discussion in 2025, 2026 about what we do in the long term and so on, I think at some point it's very restrictive if you want targeted focus. We move with a lot of benefits, social benefits, sustainability benefits without price conditionality is something that is not out of the realm of possibility. So I will stop here. It's 105 pages. Again, unfortunately, what we did is we had to go into some of the chapters and write a lot in them and maybe too much. But we had nothing to refer to because, again, we put a little bit of the cart before the horse. So now when we actually write a chapter about a book, a paper about agriculture, now we don't have to go back to what you wrote here and see whether, you know, how we squared the circle. So I stop here. I hope that it did make some sense. I mean, my colleagues will take me afterward whether it made sense or not. But what I will do is that I will take a special order. I think, Mete, I will ask you to come late last because I think that is probably easy, better for you to listen to everybody. And then the commission will set the last order. So we will do that. So I'll go to Julia and Fabio, and then Jean-Pierre is there. I cannot see if Jean-Pierre is there. He's there. So Julia, you go first.
Yeah,
That's okay.
Pleased to be the first one. And first of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulations to you and your team for launching this new project. Sounds like really a very timely initiative, and the report that you shared, although it's just the first step, right? The project covers much more. Very informative and very interesting. So thanks for providing this input for discussion. Of course, this is also something that ITA, International Emission Trading Association, that I have a pleasure to represent, is closely looking into it. As much as you are, and you are obviously in favor of emissions trading expanding and covering these sectors in territories. I would like to start with some general remarks about why we are having this position, and then go to a more detailed remarks on a couple of more specific findings in your report. So first, perhaps a couple of arguments why we think that the ETS should be expanding and should be covering new sectors and new territory. First, it's just because it's proved to be effective. There is environmental delivery. There is a mature market in the EU that works well, that after several attempts of recalibrating, it is delivering impressive emission reductions. I think it's like around 37%. Recent numbers from the last year Commission report of emission cuts and also generate significant revenues. Second reason is that all sectors must contribute, and obviously, as we are getting closer to our net zero target, there must be a more fair distribution of efforts among sectors. And ETS2, of course, is proving that there is thinking within the Commission and also legislators agree with that this is the right tool to also apply to other sectors. This is a cost-efficient tool, which is very relevant in today's world when everybody is looking at each euro. That's a tool that we decide to use to reach our political, our cost-efficient, and also, of course, it delivers revenues that can be recycled, reused to deliver environmental and climate goals. And I would say that the expansion has already started. So what we saw in the recent review is, of course, the expansion to the maritime sector, the coverage that we just heard of from your presentation. There is a decision to put in place ETS2. It's not only buildings and transport, these are also small industries that got covered by this new ETS. What's interesting is that we just saw, I believe yesterday or the day before yesterday, a decision coming from the European Commission on a request from two countries, the Netherlands and Austria, to cover even additional sectors by ETS2. That only proves that there is also appetite on a member state level to expand the coverage by emissions trading of additional sectors. It's a long list of sectors. For instance, in the Netherlands, these are greenhouses, and this is rail transport, agricultural machineries. So that only proves that expansion is already ongoing on the EU, but also member state level. And of course, in the ETS directive, there are very specific provisions to explore further expansion. So article that obliges the Commission to explore option to cover by emissions trading the municipal waste sector. I mean, I'm sure we'll speak about it in a moment bit more. To explore how to cover removals by emissions trading. As what you said at the beginning is also relevant for And this subject, as it doesn't say by ETS2, it says by ETS1, it says by emission trading, so there might be new system in place. And to explore merging ETS1 and ETS2, and the report comes in will come in 2031. So there is a good starting point for this discussion. The expansion has started. The expansion is expected, is already happening. And now a few more detailed remarks. I'll be brief on ETS2. I just would like to say that we are at the moment in AIDA focusing on a bit more near future. We think it's very relevant that this moves as planned and there are no further delays in implementation, as we see many member states unfortunately lagging behind the schedule. We think it's premature to perhaps develop a view by us on this proposal to have this being merged at some point. We have to first wait and see how ETS2 takes off and what is the price formation, what is the social response. So we do not yet have a view on that, but we'll be observing that closely. At the moment, we just believe that this is relevant. The system is in place on time, and that member states work harder than they did so far on putting in place, implementing, transposing the directive, so to have it reflected in their national legislation. On negative emission technologies, my second more detailed remark, we agree with what has been said, what is outlined in the report, that there is no reason to delay this discussion, that businesses need predictability and regulatory stability, and it will take a while before the framework is there. We would not like these negative emission technologies, especially back and dark to in any way share what happened with high hopes on CCS. And the gap between expectations that we all had a decade ago and the reality on the ground is quite big. So to ensure that there is a takeoff for these technologies, we need to have in place as soon as possible kind of a roadmap, both on how to have it covered by emission trading, ETS1. Our initial view is that ETS1 will be the right place, but also on CRCF implementation, which is relevant and linked to this subject, as this will set up methodologies for assessing this technology. On linking, we think that CBAM provided a new, very valuable impetus for this discussion. We, of course, see these developments worldwide on how other jurisdictions are putting in place emissions trading, but also we see a really increased interest with CBAM transitional phase in place and expectation for CBAM to be fully enforced on 1 January 2026. And we very much support these developments and are in favor of linkages between, probably as in our initial thought is to have a link between UK and the EU. It's very natural for us and would have a number of benefits for both markets. But of course, it's like you have also support further linkages. And the very last remark, there's like one forgotten mechanism, I would say, Article 24A in the ETS directive that is not mentioned in the report. And I would say that this is something that perhaps is also an interesting thing to look into while discussing the expansion. It is forgotten as we don't speak about it, but it's not forgotten in the way that if you look into Article 11 of the Aviation Directive, you may see that these credits generated by Article 24A are allowed for compliance for EU-based airlines with CORSIA obligation, which is very interesting because those credits are not existent. But the EU in the directive has kind of prepared ground for that. Something I spotted that found very interesting. So I would also say that this internal offsetting and additional credits generated through a new crediting project under this mechanism is something that I think should also be looked at while we're talking about it here. I'll stop here.
Indeed, 24A, I used to harp on 24A, but then somehow I lost heart. No, but thanks, Julia. Thank you very much. I think AIDA is also having its own reflection on these matters. I think Daniele Agostini, I think, is quite leading that effort together with you. So wish you well and then hope that we can continue to work in the same family with this. Fabio?
Yes, I had a couple of slides that I won't be able to see, but I'll probably use your screen, Andre. Could I also change them from here directly?
I think that you're asking to.
Okay. Okay. Can you put them on? Yeah. Well, I can start. Thank you, Andre, for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. Also, my compliments to the whole team for putting together this report. I found it very rich. I'll give a couple of comments on the part I'm more familiar with. So the waste management sector, chapter 1. I had the first slide just to show you what I work for. I work at CEWEP. We directly represent the waste strategy operators across Europe. And with waste strategy, I refer to waste incineration with energy recovery of residual waste. Thank you, Juan. So 2 key numbers. You find everything online. We have 500 waste strategy plants in Europe treating roughly 100 million tons of residual non-recyclable waste every year. We can already go to the next slide. So what do we do? This is what we do every day, 24/7. We provide an hygienic task. We do this 24/7. Well, I mean, myself, I'm here in Brussels, but the operators I represent all across Europe. They thermally treat our residual waste. So for instance, the white bag that you put in the street in Brussels, that goes to the Brussels Energy plant in Brussels North, where it is transformed into electricity and heat. So we're talking about waste that cannot be recycled or is not good enough for recycling, or even the residues from recycling, they can be effectively recovered in terms of energy. Let me do a clarification, something I also found in the report, because I'm here also with economists. On an economical perspective, there's a huge difference between waste and a fuel. Waste is not a fuel. A fuel is something that an installation buys to make energy. Waste is something that an installation is paid for, okay, to safely treat it. Okay? This is a fundamental difference. And then on top of it, you can also make energy out of it. Why am I saying this? Because there is no competition between waste to energy plants and conventional power generation technologies. I heard a lot of policymakers making misunderstanding on this. The functional unit of a waste to energy plant is the ton of waste treated, not the heat produced. That's also why the ETS1 at the moment is not really fit for waste to energy. It will have to change in terms of benchmark and also in terms of approach. And that's why we don't think ETS1 is actually the good way to go for at the moment. So there is no competition with the power sector. I don't build a waste to energy plant because I need power. I build it because I have a residual waste problem. There is also no competition with other sectors that partially, like coal incineration, they use some waste streams in the process. First of all, because these are very specific waste streams, waste to energy plants that you can see here. We are dedicated facilities to treat an entire span of everything that we generate in our society effectively. And also the environmental requirements that the dedicated plant has are different and more stringent than usually co-incineration plants. There is also a big issue on cost and how we can translate cost, because we cannot put cost down into our products. We don't really have products. Our service is upstream, is waste management treatment. And so if we go to the next slide, you can see how our value chain, the waste management value chain, is much more longer and much more articulated. So if we are at the very end of this value chain, so we have to go back if we want to translate the cost upstream. And the question is, who is the polluter? Who is responsible for the fossil carbon that ultimately will come out from the stack from our facilities? Is it the waste truck that delivers the waste to the bunker? Not really. Is it even the citizen, the municipality upstream? Well, yes, we are responsible as citizens for what we produce and we put out there. But very ultimately, the real polluter and the responsible is actually whoever generates that fossil product and put it into the market. So in terms of really consumers' behavior and producer responsibility, we have to take this into account. And then, most of all, what happens if the system becomes too expensive or too complex, and if the final destination becomes too expensive? I can tell you the answer is very, very simple. All these trucks are gonna go somewhere else. And for a waste management practitioner, next slide, like myself and in the community, we know very well. Yeah, we know very well that the system will always find the cheapest solution. I hear a lot also in the discussion saying, yes, but Fabio, we have the EU environmental regulation that will take care of it to avoid landfilling illegal export to other countries. We have the Waste Framework Directive, the waste shipping regulations. Let's look at the naked realities. A lot of European countries are on track to fail their circular economy targets by 2035. We have very critical situations in many parts of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, where I come from, Italy. Some regions have a very fragile waste management infrastructure. Spain, Greece, I can go on. I'm not going to show, for time reasons, the statistics today, but 23% of municipal waste still goes to landfills in Europe. Do we really want to put more pressure to some countries that already have a very delicate waste management system? This is the question we have to address. So in our race to fight climate change, do we want to destroy our environment? Let's be careful about it. I wanted to, my two last remarks. Another argument that I've seen and I've also read in the report is the fact that the inclusion of waste incineration in the ETS will justify the inclusion of non-permanent CCU products like fuels and chemicals. I can see where this comes from, but it's incomplete and it's a superficial vision, because what we are not talking about is the volumes. How much of these synthetic products made out of CO2 can we make in the future compared to the huge volumes of non-recyclable plastic waste that we have been producing until yesterday, we are producing today, and we will have to treat in the next decade, even after 2050, and will cause fossil CO2 emissions. Let's not remember time is an important variable in our analysis. Last but not least, then I'll conclude. This graph, I think it's important. Let's learn from the past and also the present. I hear a lot of the argument, yes, but voluntarily some member states have already included their facilities in ETS, like Sweden, Denmark, 2 plants in Lithuania. Yes, they did it. It was they did it voluntarily. It was a political decision. Did it work? Well, here I reported for the last years the amount of waste treated by waste incineration plants in Sweden. You can see that it increased. That means that the fossil CO2 emission from Swedish waste to energy plants increased in the last years, and they've been in ETS for more than 10 years, since 2013. Now, did the ETS deliver its goal? I don't think so. Did CO2 emissions from waste to energy decrease? No. Did consumers' behavior, plastic production decrease in Sweden? Absolutely not. Somebody can counter argue and say, yes, Fabio, but the ETS price was low, there were free allowances, the ETS was weak, with higher prices, they will be different. I can tell you what's happening now in Sweden, where operators are getting more and more concerned for higher CO2 prices because costs are getting problematic. And they are starting to do, some operators are starting to do something very simple, establishing blacklists of some waste streams that they say, I'm not going to take it. Or if I have to take that specific stream full of fossil-based material, I have to charge you 2-3 times more. And then the question is where all that stuff is going to go. And to conclude, also, recyclers are getting worried in Sweden because recycling also has rejects. Sorting and recycling facilities, they also have rejects, and they need waste incineration as a partner to close the loop. And recycler, they say, where am I going to put my residues? So even recycling is going to become more expensive. So the argument that including waste incineration in the ETS will also foster recycling, the opposite is the truth. It will make the whole chain more expensive. My conclusion, it's a complex topic. Thank you for the last slide. And We, as a sector, we had our General Assembly also yesterday. We are fully aware of what the problem is. We know we have fossil CO2 emissions. It's clear. I think that what I hear a lot here in Brussels, that the statement that pointed the finger to the stack of a plant and say, oh, you emit fossil CO2 emissions, so you have to be included in ETS1, you have to pay for it. I don't think it's very constructive because we're missing, again, what is the source of the problem. And if the source of the problem is not clear, then also the solutions we're going to find might not be appropriate if we want to do something good for our planet.
So let me ask you, are you for or against?
So my conclusion is we are totally available and happy to discuss about solutions. We don't think ETS1 is appropriate. If ultimately the political intention will be to put the burden at the end to the waste incineration plant to the stack, then we will need to find mechanisms to translate fairly this cost upstream. Maybe a system like ETS2 could be more appropriate for a dedicated system that will have to be thought about with the proper mechanism. And also, let me say, Andre, a mechanism that for every ton of fossil CO2 that you pay, then you get directly as an operator something back to reinvest in the decarbonization technologies like CCUS that at the moment is something we are experimenting, we're a front runner in this, and is the most promising solution to abate our emissions. Because either you close the outlet or you close the inlet, as I said before. But closing the inlet, I don't think it's a good one. Good.
Thank you, Fabio. Sorry for the direct question, but I think we were forced. People told us, "American guys, you can't just rate yes pros and cons. You got to say something." And so if I have to say something, I ask you to. Let me go to Claudia Gibbs. Claudia, interesting to hear what you think of what we had to say, and we take this as friendly criticism. Hopefully, it's not, but we will take it in a friendly way.
Thank you, Andre. First, can you hear me properly? Because I've had some audio problems in the beginning.
We can hear you, Scott.
Great, fantastic. Yeah, and also sorry for not being able to join you in Brussels today. Next time I will try to join you in person again, but today I couldn't make it. So congratulations to your report. It is very timely and comprehensive. And it draws a very ambitious agenda for the next 2-3 years. It covers a large range of questions. Some of them we have already started to discuss in our ministry, the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action in Germany. But not all of them, I must admit. So there is pretty much to do for us too. Some of these questions you raise have a larger impact than the others, but each of one, I guess, deserves a careful analysis and discussion. So while we will not solve and discuss all questions today, your report will help us to kickstart the discussion and also to keep in mind that while discussing one question, we must not forget all the other questions that can have an impact on the topic discussed. Yeah, for instance, if we were to include 50% of international flights into ETS1 or link with a large country such as Ukraine, maybe not so likely in the near future, but that would have a significant impact on allowance supply and also the price in the stationary sector. So I'm also very interested to hear what the Commission is going to say later on these topics. I'm sure they are already working on these questions, and I'm very glad that to learn also from the mission letters to the commissioners that climate change is still a top priority for the Commission, and look forward to the cooperation in the next coming months. Okay, now I'm not going to comment on all topics, but maybe select 2 of them. First, in my view, the biggest challenge for post-2030 ETS is how to design it that it is fit for net zero. Yeah, when we have a climate target of 90% for 2040, it is not unlikely that the LRF will stay the same or remain at a similar level as it is today, leading to a zero cap around 2040. And we need, as you said, Andre, we need to be prepared for a fast shrinking market with less liquidity and increasing scarcity. While on the other hand, most experts, including the Commission's impact assessment, expect substantial residual emissions in 2040, not only in aviation and shipping, but also in the industry and maybe even in the energy sector. So looking at what role CDR can play in the situation seems to be obvious, but it could fundamentally change the character of the ETS. There are different options on the table. We have to look at separate trading system with the obligation to buy removal certificates, or integrating them directly into ETS, or maybe a combination of both, a sequencing of these different options. We need to analyze the pros and cons. I wonder in particular how market participants will behave when they expect a zero cap. Will they start hoarding certificates from 2030 on? So do we have to act already very quickly, as you mentioned, Andre, or is it wise to develop removals maybe separate from the ETS at the first, in order to avoid mitigation deterrence, and then maybe integrate them on a later stage? The expectation that cheap removal credits will be available in the future could deter decision makers from making investments into emission abatement and delay the transformation. We also should think about safeguards to avoid setting perverse incentives. So Article 30 of the ETS directive is about permanent removals, mostly understood as bags and ducts, and maybe enhanced weathering. And from these bags is probably the most advanced and the cheapest option, but it comes with large environmental and climate risks. So we do have sustainability requirements for biomass in ETS, but are these sufficiently robust to avoid carbon leakage from ETS sectors to LULUCF? If we will see higher volumes of imported biomass coming to the EU, we could have a carbon leakage from EU to third countries, as the emissions from harvesting the biomass are not accounted for in the EU. So I think we need to be careful with biomass and have a deeper look at this. The second topic I would like to address is and so I'm very glad that Fabio had the intervention just before me, is the potential inclusion of waste incineration plants. It is a very small sector, like 4 or 5 million tons of CO2 in Germany, but deserves special attention because there are few abatement options at the waste incineration plants itself. But on the other hand, they are often mentioned as potential suppliers of CO2 and carbon in a carbon circular economy. And I'm very interested to hear your ideas and views on that topic. Germany has included waste into its national ETS since beginning of this year, and is planning to apply for an opt-in of waste incineration plants into ETS1, when the ETS will start in ETS2 will start in 2027, and our national system will be transitioned into ETS2. That's now in the draft of our National Greenhouse Gas Emission Trading Act, as it was proposed by the ministry, and if it will be adopted in the way it was proposed by us, we will apply for an opt-in of waste into ETS1 as well. So, of course, we have to have and keep in mind what Fabio has said, and we also will evaluate the impacts on the sector. But we believe that the carbon price for waste incineration offers also some chances. Yeah, it gives incentives for better sorting and recycling of plastics waste. There will be an incentive to use more energy for district heating, as waste to energy plants could apply for free allocation once they are in ETS. Now they cannot. Revenues can be used to fund not only CCS and CCU, but also in sustainable waste management practices. So there are also some chances in this. So far, most emission abatement projects on waste incineration plants focus on CCS. But as I said, there is also demand for CO2 as a feedstock in other sectors, most prominently in the chemical sector for plastics production. And I wonder, is it better to store carbon from how to abate emissions, like from waste incineration plants, or should we use the captured CO2 in a circular economy? And how can we create sustainable carbon cycles without loopholes? What role can waste incineration plants play in that? So I would be very much interested to learn your ideas and experiences. Of course, I don't want to deny that a carbon price for waste comes with risk. We must avoid that waste is being redirected to landfills or exported, and we have to deal with the increasing municipal waste fees because the carbon price has to be recovered somehow and passed through to the waste fees. So yeah, these are my thoughts on only two of the topics you mentioned in your report. I leave it here and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Claudia. Again, I think that you're correct. What obviously we have no ambition to be the solution to everything and to provide a definitive solution. I think that there is a debate and people will be chipping in their views. We saw that we've done a fair bit of work over this over the years, and that we've also had a community around us that could help us to think through this. And I said, look at it in this way, not, you know, there's certain arrogance in us, but not that much arrogance. I will go to Jean-Pierre de Bruxelles from Fuels Europe. Jean-Pierre.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well now?
You can.
Yeah. First, I also apologize for not being in Brussels with you today, but I think I had to selfishly prevent you to get my virus, so I will keep it selfishly for me. Sorry also for the distorted voice, so I hope I can go through without too many problems. And I also face IT problems, so the webcam is somewhere above where I look at you downstairs. Everything collapsed at the same time, so sorry for those circumstances. I think I have sent you several slides, or Miriam sent slides to the ERCST, so if we can have them on the screen.
They're being put now. Yeah, they're on the screen now.
Exactly. Thank you very much. So the first one is just the identity card of our sector. If I can move to the next one, which I call the first slide. So we are the European Fuel Manufacturing Association, and you see on the left-hand side a very summary of our manifesto, which is not that old. It was prepared in spring ahead of the EP election, but that's the summary of our commitment to contribute to the achievement of the climate neutrality goal, ensuring security of supply, and remaining innovative and competitive throughout the transition. And I think several of those keywords will come back in the presentation that I will make regarding the topic of the day. So if we move to the next slide, just to cover my 3 slides in one single sentence, I would say that André went through all the detailed, I would say, parameters, key elements to be looked at, but I think Claudia said it all already. We need always to consider them as a whole. So it's probably not convenient to look at just the scope, ignoring carbon leakage, competitiveness, abatement cost, etc., etc. So I try to focus here on the issue of the day. And my first remark would be, sorry to be that old, but when in October 2001, so nearly 23 years ago, the Commission proposed the first ETS directive. It was inspired from the Danish scheme and moreover the UK trading scheme. And I think I remember the intention was at the time to say, look, we will extend naturally that scope by interlinkages. And by 2020, time horizon wise, we do hope that we will have a kind of international emissions trading scheme. So the extension of the scope at the beginning, more than 2 decades ago, was really geared towards that dimension. So to go at least maybe to G20 or something of the kind, OECD level, not necessarily worldwide emissions would be covered, but the idea was around the corner. Where today, when we speak about the extension of the scope, we go very fragmented. We look at all those dimensions. You mentioned agriculture. We just discussed waste management, incineration, etc., etc. Which is a totally different approach. And the souvenir that we have is still in Article 1. If we go for an ex-ante cap and trade system, that's because of the economic theory. that is telling us this is the most cost-effective and economically efficient manner to achieve a given goal. And when the cap is down to 0, the goal is achieved. That's the good thing, I think, to always keep in mind before we move to the second message to the left. Careful assessment for any extension. What you see here, impact on competitiveness, risk of carbon leakage. You can read this A, B, B, A. It all goes together. I will not make a distinction on the CBAM stuff, but if we have a CBAM, this is also to prevent greenhouse gas emissions to be emitted elsewhere. So we need also to make sure that when we consider the extension of the scope, we look at the impact on the competitiveness of the sectors that are already in and the potential new sectors. So the equation is not that easy to solve. We have to look at the global balance each time. So carbon leakage for trade exposed sectors, we keep talking about the business case to drive decarbonization. We have to stay economically viable in the EU, keep producing, transform ourselves, and stay, like we say in our first slide that you saw before, competitive throughout the transition. So the equation is not easy to solve. And before we run out to this ETS to be extended, we have to think about those sectors that are either already regulated or not yet regulated. This is the last bit on that slide, how to promote emission reduction in any new sector. You have the case where their greenhouse gas emissions are regulated already or not yet. And we may think about, shall we cover them by an ETS, DETS, extending one of those 2 ETSs that we have now, maybe more than 1, more than 2 will be in the future, which is also a problematic in itself. So where do we want to regulate those sectors? There are standards, there are mandates, there are what I call command and control input through permit requirements versus DETS, complementing each other or not. Here I cannot resist to make the link with the Industrial Emissions Directive. When the Commission tabled the first ETS directive, some may remember the title of that directive. This is to create the emissions trading scheme, but also amending the Integrated Prevention Pollution Control Directive, ensuring that the non bis in idem principle will be preserved and that authorities will not set limit values for greenhouse gases that are covered under the ETS. Fair enough, we have that provision in the 2 directives mirroring each other, IPPC that became IED in the meantime, and the ETS directive. But still, we see as part of the review clauses in 2028, which is basically tomorrow, a review clause where the Commission will assess on how to improve eventually the synergies between those 2 directives. That's just an example to show you that the multiplicity in various silos of different policies and measures that try and tackle the same issue called decarbonization can be going from the best to the worst. If we have contradicting policies and measures, like a market-based instrument, which is de facto technology neutral, to something which would be more control and command, listing techniques, considered best available techniques, would eventually become a problem for the sectors that are already in, be they in ETS1 or in ETS2, because you have noted that ETS2 has been expanded beyond what the Commission had proposed at the first place. It was only road transport and building, and now it's also a part of the smallest business sectors. Next slide, please. Here, this is an option that we would like also to eventually see impact assessed for the reasons explained in the impact assessment accompanying the proposals in July 2021. The Commission had proposed to extend ETS1 to maritime, where aviation was already with the power sector and the energy intensive industries, but they set aside the road transport, and some of our companies were recommending why not to assess whether we would not have a global instrument for all transport modes. If we want to decarbonize transport, we need to make a business case for renewable and low carbon fuels. We are thankful to the Commission that they have developed the tools also to make sure that those fuels will be zero rated in terms of emission factor under the ETS, but we need to promote the business case. So we need to have a carbon price which would be sufficient. But that carbon price may also upset the ETS1 sectors. So keeping them aside would probably hit two birds with one stone. So that could be an option to be assessed. We are not necessarily saying this is the solution. We are just recommending that that solution would be impact assessed. When you look at ETS2, second part of the slide, we still struggle to understand how the demand and the supply will match in real terms. We can, of course, discuss the assumptions and the calculation made, and several people will make different calculation. There is also some assumption made on how the heating and cooling sector will decarbonize from now to 2027 and from 1st of January 2027, where we have no visibility. And of course, because this is the same cap for RTB plus, like I explained before. I think the chart on the slide on the right-hand side does not reflect exactly what the new ETS2 will look like, because this is an extract from the impact assessment. But there might be this potential mismatch between the EU-wide cap of allowances and the total demand, with several consequences. And we would be delighted also to get some more clarity, some explanation on how the stabilization adjustment mechanisms. There are 3 clauses in the directive that would explain how the increase of all of a sudden the carbon price will be addressed by releasing a certain amount of allowances into the market would work in practice. Several stakeholders keep thinking that ETS2 will be a kind of flat tax around 45 euro per ton. This is things that we keep hearing, where this is not true at all. This is an ETS2 with floating price, including those adjustment mechanisms, but still unclear how it will work in practice, because those mechanisms are mutually exclusive and cannot be repeated more than once within a year. So we are asking ourselves in terms of social consequences if the price is rocketing high in the sky very soon after 1st of January 2027. And my last slide, I think I would not be too long, because Claudia, that spoke just before me, has stolen all my words. If we are in the economic theory and we think about an EU-wide trading scheme by 2050, we should put all segments of the economy and have a net zero cap in 2050, including negative emissions. That's what the economic theory, I think, would tell us. That's not what we have been doing so far. So we are on another trajectory. But as you can see, the 2039 that she mentioned is also calculated this way by the chart you see. If nothing changes, the cap is down to 0, whereas the Commission has calculated there would be residual emissions that would need to be compensated. So the theory is also telling us we should really consider adding the CDRs in a single cap for all those emissions well before the end of the period, to also provide some predictability to the ETS actors, and not wait for 2030 something to rectify things that I think should be rectified much earlier. This is the beginning of our reflection along those issues with you, André. So we will keep working closely, and we will develop our recommendations in the months to come. We are just the beginning of the journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yes, your point is well taken, and I think that we have mentioned that we do, at least we took seriously the note or the statement that is made in the letter about migrating to a unique or one CO2 market in the EU. We do see some intermediate steps, but But clearly, ETS 1, ETS 2, and maybe others that may start alone are going to have to come together, and hopefully sooner rather than later. Now, Mette, you have the advantage of heard everybody, and they all seem to be very keen. I'm not really keen to listen to us, but they're keen to listen to you. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to the launch of this process. You and your team have done a very good job in this first report. I think it's a very good overview of the possible scope extensions, and the timing is really on the spot. We are now also starting in earnest at the Commission level. You know, we have had some kind of more fluffy discussions in the past years, and now we have started our preparatory work really clearly now for the next revision. So I think your process is going to work very well with what is going to come up. And the report goes through all the main elements that we need to look at. All the issues are open, so I cannot say what we are going to do. We are going to have impact assessment now. We are going to have our public consultation launched early in 2025. So there's an awful lot of analytical work that will be done from the Commission side, both internally and also based on all the input that we receive. So I'm also very happy to receive input from everyone today and take that into account. And one issue that is clear for the next ETS review in 2026 is that there are no easy decisions. There are pros and cons for everything, whether it is removals, new 2040 targets. There are a lot of issues that we will need to look at very, very carefully. So you have looked at the coverage in a very broad sense, from adding new sectors to adding new countries, adding new technologies such as CCU and removals, and also new gases. So I think we can look at your document, and you said it yourself, as a good reference work. It's a starting point, and then it will be going into much more detail. So here is the opportunity to ask the right questions that we will then have to reflect on, and the answers will only be available much, well, at least as we go along the process. So some of the topics, the issue is not only what is the impact on the ETS. That is, of course, a very important issue. But we have to also look at what is the broader policy. And I think there Fabio already came in for waste. It's not only is it in the ETS or not, but it's the whole environmental impact that we will also have to look at. So these are important broader policy considerations that we need to look at. For agriculture, ETS is an option, but it's not an end in itself. And the question is, to what extent can carbon pricing play a useful role to reduce the emissions in this data? And we also have the cap. So we are exploring options for ETS and agriculture, but we are also exploring options for non-ETS policies. And this is still rather open. On removals, the overarching policy question is how to incentivize the development of the removals. And I think this is also what EuLA was saying. And to what extent can the ETS play a role? And is that enough of the role that the ETS could be played? So what other solutions may we need? And what is the what is the need also after net zero? So we have many questions there that are not only linked to the ETS to look into for the removal. And for non-permanent CCU, here the question is really about the incentives. If we go downstream and put the surrender obligation further down the value chain, how do we then change the incentive, and what would be the impact for the demand and supply for captured CO2? We have to be very careful. This is very well assessed. So to sum it up, there's no expansion just for the sake of expansion, but we need to look at how the overall policy mix is, the broader policy mix, can deliver the emission reductions. The ETS is not the only thing. We need to look at the whole policy mix implication, and I think this is where we go differently from previous revisions of the ETS, where we could still very much look at sectors in silos and in different policies. We need to look very much across the whole policy mix, much more when we go post-20. And then moving to some of the yes, you're totally right. We are very aware that the market is declining rapidly. We have a very ambitious linear reduction factor, but also that is not a reason in itself just to look for where we expand. It has to be the whole policy area. So if we look at one of the reasons why we really appreciate your report is, however, that you look very much on the details on how will the various policies actually affect ETS and how will the market develop. And this, I think that the report does really well. It's good to see what is the impact of the supply and demand balances, what are the size of the various sectors. And this is, I cannot go into all the details of the report now, but these are very valuable input also for our work. Yeah. So we all know that what we have to look at in the 2026 review is negative emissions, it is municipal waste incineration, and it is the accounting for non-permanent CCU. These are really top priority areas. They are new and they would make a big change to the ETS as it is. So maybe this is what you would call somehow radical changes. They also all closely related and they all move away from a point source system to a system of tracking the CO2 molecule from the origin of the capture to the whole transportation and the ultimate emission into the atmosphere. And this is an issue we will have to look further into. We will also have to look into the MSR review. It will be the first time that we really have to review the MSR or evaluate the MSR and review it. And as always, carbon leakage must be reviewed when we have a review of ETS. Then we have been asked to also look at international linking and the 20 megawatt threshold that you're also looking at in the report. They are maybe for different reasons a little bit of a lower priority. We have already been discussing that with ETS2 we are covering large share of smaller industrial emissions of smaller industry, and therefore this becomes a little bit less relevant. For linking, there we are very pleased with this linking. It works very well. But for the moment, we see limited opportunity for further linking. So this is going to be probably a less big subject. But the development of international carbon pricing is a big priority, as was also mentioned by von der Leyen. I think this I can come back to, but here, I mean, we are not looking at one big carbon market, but we are very happy that the CBAM has spurred all this interest in carbon pricing, and getting carbon pricing already in most of the G20 countries is a very big plus. And our focus is still on compliance markets and getting as many compliance markets as possible, and in this way achieving carbon pricing internationally. On international transport, this is the area of my colleague. It's not really my unit, but the question of extra European coverage is highly relevant, both for maritime and for aviation. and it will be a substantial element in our 26 review. For international aviation, departing flights are responsible for 80 million tons of emissions. So this is not a tiny issue, and I think the EU will cover a fair share if we get to cover that. We are already supporting e-fuels and cleaner aviation fuels with our free allocation policy, and then we could also say there's an enlargement dimension to this. Maybe we could already start covering flights to and from candidate countries. Whereas non-CO2 in international or in aviation is probably a challenging issue for the ETS. Moving to international maritime transport, the report emphasizes the implications of failure of an agreement at IMO level. But there's also the opposite scenario. We could have an IMO adopt a system here. And in that case, our review would be to ensure that we avoid a double burden for maritime. And then coming back to the international dimension here, enlargement is a possible form of expansion of the ETS. And yeah, this is an area that is already expanding, and I think this is an area we will look a lot more into. It's not linked directly to the review, but it's an area that we will have to review in the coming years, and to better understand what could be the market impact for Ukraine or Montenegro, for example, of joining the EU. Yes. So I think this is a very good start. We look forward to the further process. There will be more in-depth discussion on many of these elements, as you said, and by that we will also be further into our developments. For now, we're only at the starting phase, but I'm very happy to start the discussions and gain others' views as well.
And thank you very much, and thank you very much to all of you. The one thing that I've been deficient is to also recognize, I don't see you, and I believe that I wrote this alone. So my colleagues that are in the room that have been very, very active and working very hard. Probably we worked too hard over the last couple of 2 weeks, but we realized that the depths of the hole we're in. So there's Juan Lopez and Alexandra Maratu and Pauline Ole and Nigel and I see Marino and Elena are somewhere in the back. I mean, we have quite an interesting exercise for us, because just one of the times usually we do work in some silos, the guy with the ETS and the guy with the CBAM and so on. In this case, we actually had to make also appeal to some of the people that were working in other areas other than ETS, because this is the way this project went. So it was quite fascinating, but I want to thank them all for quite hard work for the last few weeks and months. But there's more to come, so it's okay. Now, looking in the room, I think that is the time, it's too little time, but I'm looking in the room and I will be looking on the screen to see if there's anybody that wants to raise their hands in the screen, or you want to raise questions or comments. If there are comments, I understand there are comments, but let's not make it into another panelist. So let's try to keep it reasonable. So there's the gentleman there. So if you speak, because of the sophistication of the audio in this room, if you can stand up and speak, I think that would not be unhelpful. So there's two people. You go first, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Alistair McGurr, work for SC, a electricity generator that operates across the UK and Ireland. Just to caveat my question, we're supportive of linking between the UK and the EU, particularly in the context of electricity trade between GB and the island of Ireland, and what the implications of the CBAM might have there. But in relation to your report, Andre, I think it's kind of pleasing to see that you're raising liquidity issues as a particular impact. We see a lot of that in the UK at the moment in terms of what that means for volatility, and we think that issue for the EU ETS is happening more quickly than maybe is appreciated. So I think the focus on liquidity is important. But just in terms of interested that your report brought in both scope expansion and geographic expansion in a kind of collection of options. But I was just wondering, the kind of question to the panel is there a trade-off in trying to do all at once? And does there need to be a kind of strategic view about what the direction is for the EU ETS going forward in respect of either going for geographic expansion and having a kind of simpler ETS, or kind of going down into what does the European Union need in respect of decarbonising its own?
I will let some of the panelists and especially maybe the commission react. There's only so many of them. They work hard to, but there's only so many of them. And in the Swiss example has shown it's not as simple. Tobias?
Yeah, Tobias Reiser, the Danish Agriculture and Food Council. The issue of liquidity has been mentioned a number of times. In this report, is the potential of a new supply of renewables from the agriculture sector in Europe is that being explored now, where we know that the appetite for international linkages and the use of Article 6.4 is limited.
Thank you. And there was a Renaud, go ahead.
So, Ulrich from Ceramic, the European Ceramic Industry Association. As you know, in ceramics, we have many sites, more than 1,000 in the ETS1, and we will have some sites in ETS2. So we are well positioned to speak about both and to see how they are going to work. And on ETS2, I wanted to welcome some of the comments that have been made by Jean-Pierre de Bruxelles. We think it's very good that it's covered in the report because there is a lack, I think, of understanding. Many people who are going to be affected by ETS2 do not know. There is very little discussion. We know that the member states are delaying the implementation. The Commission has agreed on some extension for the implementation. But 2027 is almost tomorrow. It's coming really, really fast. And if we are not prepared, I think it will be a disaster. If people are still using gas boilers in houses, for example, you will have really some problems in the streets. And we talked a lot about the scope today. So of course, we're looking at the scope for industries, for installations that are not in ETS1. So it's a good example, as we know that the scope, the extension to industries not in ETS1 was decided, it was not proposed by the European Commission, it was proposed by the European Parliament. So decided without any impact assessment. So there should have been an impact assessment, and we think that for any extension to other sectors, it's very, very important that we factor all the consequences and how it's going to work. ETS2 today exists in practice in some countries like Austria and Germany because they had it before, or almost at the same time. Germany already existed, so it's not called ETS2, but it's a carbon tax that is applied also to industries and installations that are not in ETS1. In Austria, I know examples of industries that are receiving the invoice, they are in ETS1 and they're receiving the invoice for ETS2. So we need much, much more thinking. We need a lot of harmonization, particularly on compensation and carbon linkage.
Thank you. Let's keep the intervention resolution. I think that we got three questions that probably in packages of three probably works. Anybody wants to take the question? I think that you've heard something about the importance of liquidity. I think that that is being recognized, and whether this is how important this is, and I think we emphasize it in a few places ago. We do think that this is going to have a problem, and that there is a contribution by bringing additional underlying commodity into the market and players into the market will be a positive. You are totally agree. I mean, we did other considerations. This is not the only consideration. That rarely decisions being made on one dimension, but it is a consideration. I think you're talking about the UK, which seems to be beginning to have some issues. Then Tobias and then Renaud. Anybody wants to start with and react to this? No. Yeah, Jean-Pierre, Claudia. Was this addressed to somebody? Renaud, was this addressed to somebody in particular, or was and Tobias?
Well, I
You
was
addressed it to the panel, but
I was
the panel
addressing
seems
to
to
the panel. I
be.
also addressed, I mean,
You said
in
it
the
was fine.
report,
Yeah.
if there might be, yeah.
Okay,
we'll see it.
Mette is helping me out here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So you were asking for agri removals and what was the appetite for that? I think the appetite in the EU ETS, if there is an appetite for ETS2, is for permanent removals. We need to ensure it's a system where we have permanent removals, where we are talking about high carbon price emissions. So we need to make sure that this is a very robust system with very robust removals. So it's the permanence would be the deciding factor for whatever could be included in the ETS. ETS2, it's indeed a sensitive issue. As far as we see, all member states are implementing the monitoring of emissions for ETS2 as they must. Yes, there's a little bit of delay in some transposition, but I think we have time to 2027 to sort this out everywhere. Then indeed, the smaller industries were included in the co-decision to ETS2, and this causes a little bit of difficulties in the whole monitoring and reporting of emissions and making sure that you're covered both by ETS1 and ETS2. But we have had a very thorough discussions in the expert group, and we have made it now compulsory also to report ETS1 installations and ETS2 installations, so that you can see which fuels have been used in ETS1 and ETS2. So we try to make it as clear as possible to avoid that we have this, what we call double counting or double burden between ETS1 and ETS2. And I think that is landed quite well. We of course have to see it in practice, but it should be possible to have this reporting between ETS1 and ETS2 installations, so we avoid a double burden for anyone. I think those were.
There was an interesting question in a way, because yes, we did cover the waterfront. We covered everything because we covered everything, and I think that's what, that's doesn't mean that we necessarily see everything at the same time or everything happening. But the question was, do you go lateral? Do you go deep? Do you do everything at the same time? I think that at least what I read from you, Mette, maybe, again, I don't want this to make a conversation, inevitably become a conversation on the commission, but that's okay. But my sense is that you were putting some priorities in what you're saying, that you say, well, this would be more of a priority for us, it should be more of a less of a priority for us, like linking, I didn't hear you saying. So I think there was some implicit prioritization, maybe it's not quite a strong word, but there is some importance that you will be putting and staggering the discussion. As said, there's only so many of you that I don't know how much you can take at the same time.
Yeah, I think as I was mentioning, what is really important is to look at the waste sector, which is where we're supposed to look at whether we can include it already from 2028. This is an important question. The removals are, of course, an important element. The review of the MSR and how it will function in a market with less allowances, and CCU, and that's linked to the waste as well, and the whole carbon cycle question. These are very important questions to look at. Whereas other issues, and I mentioned, so the international dimension, we don't see any prospects for linking. At the moment, we are happy with the link we have. It works well, but further linking, there's no prospect. Also international credits, that's other international dimension. We clearly have a domestic target in the EU, and I see very little appetite for opening that. So we would like to do whatever we do within Europe, mitigation and possible removals from within Europe. And then of course, there is the international aspects for maritime and aviation. That's going to be an important aspect of the news.
Yeah, Liv Rate from Hydro, and if there are one or two more, because after this, I mean, we're reaching to the end of the session. If there's one or more of you, please do it now, while we still have time. Liv, please go ahead.
First of all, thank you for organizing this. It's very important timing with the debate. I get a little bit confused, and that is with regards to the lack of flexibility combined with having high ambitions. And then I get further confused in regards to listening at, yes, one might look at permanent carbon removals, but we are low CCU. And permanent carbon removals, the Commission has defined as lasting for several centuries. Then in the certification ongoing debate that are happening now, regulation happening now, they're also defining a product where the carbon is stored for 35 years. But then you are allowing the U in the ETS. I don't make this calculation to function with regards to then what is eligible and why is it eligible, because some are better than the others. Yeah, and permanent many centuries are the best, of course. But I'm happy to see that you're opening up for this U, but I'm really confused what U is in regards to this permanent perspective.
I'm looking for another intervention if there is one. If there's not one, I think what I'll do is I'll just ask. First of all, I mean, Liv had a precise thing, and I don't think he was addressing to me. I think he was addressing to my neighbor. But what I'd like to see if there's anybody else. I'm not seeing any other hands. I think you think this report was perfect, which makes us full of joy. But what I'll do in that case, I will start on my left and kind of give for kind of maybe reacting to what Liv said, but also anything that you may wanna. And the last word, not last word, last word for the session.
I think my last word would be about liquidity. I think it's a very relevant subject that has been raised. But just a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, if we have new sectors covered, we have a new supply, but we also have new demand created. So we have to kind of look at both sides on how it actually impacts the market. And I think that's why the discussion about removals, I mentioned already, is so relevant, and that's why we should not delay this discussion. Also in the UK, of course, there's been just a public consultation on that subject on how to integrate the GDRs in the UK ETS. It also contributed to this conversation, submitting our response. So it's also interesting to see these two conversations going in parallel in the UK and in the EU. And of course, one of the points we raised that if there is perhaps not at the moment, it's not a step, but if there is a prospect for linking these markets and creating rules on removal in separation may make it more difficult in the future to align these markets and to link. So actually our recommendation is to perhaps coordinate on how this is being done on both sides of the channel. And on liquidity, one more point on MSR, we of course have in the EULA cancellation provision that removes large quantities of allowances, but not all of them. I mean, there is still a threshold, and I understand will be reviewed that there is 400 million left at least in the MSR, and also interesting in the context of discussion about liquidity, what will be options to be discussed on how to deal with that, whether there will be any appetite for this pool of allowances to perhaps use in any specific situations that may have liquidity. But of course, more scarcity we have and closer we near to net zero, this subject will be raised more often, and probably there you cannot eat a cake and have a cake, right? Like have a very scarce market and very liquid market. I'll be happy to hear if anyone has a solution on that.
Thanks, Julia. Mette?
Yes, thank you. I think I said so much already, so I don't necessarily have so much to add, but I can maybe answer a little bit to your question. So I think it is two very different things. When you have the storage and you have the removals, and you want to have a credit for that. When you have CCU, that means it's the whole carbon cycle, and there is more about an accounting principle. Where do you want to account the emission? And now we're accounting the right place at the moment. And this is the whole issue we need to look at. Is it possible to incentivize CCU by changing that? Or does it make perverse incentives then? So this is what the whole issue is that we are looking at right now. We have to ensure that if we go down that route, that there is then clear guarantees that we are not creating some loopholes.
Fabio?
Well, thank you very much. Also, my side for the discussion is extremely interesting. And I'm happy also that Mette said how the three key priorities are waste, removals, and also CCU. That actually the waste to energy sector touches the three of them. They focus on waste generation and landfill, but also with CCUS, we can also generate carbon removals. And as you said, it's important to understand the upstream and downstream approach of products. To answer to Liv, that's an interesting discussion. I'm also part of the expert group on the conventional removals. And with regard to CCU, that's my personal opinion. The way that you solve it, also with regard to ETS, is that you really have to make a life cycle assessment and really understanding if that specific CCU products like methane, synthetic, whatever, really brings a climate benefits or not. That's the way how then it should be incentivized, yes or no, into the ETS. And so to conclude, as I said, at the moment, as an industry representing waste management in general, so waste management, we don't think ETS1 is the right solution for how it is designed today. So unless it will dramatically change or probably new solutions will have to be found. And as a sector, we're more than happy to discuss for alternatives. If, again, it will be easier, because I understand it's easier to put the burden and quantify the emissions at the very end upstream to the flight. If that will be the political, let's say, idea, then again, we'll really have to do it right, design it right with proper mechanism to reflect the cost. And maybe something similar to ETS2 or a dedicated system like what is now thinking for agriculture might be more appropriate, because the issues that we have are similar to the discussion that they were back in the day on ETS2.
Thank you. Jean-Pierre?
Yes, thank you, André. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yep. Just following up on the CCU non-permanent, I think in the industrial and carbon management communication earlier this year, the Commission rightly say we want to incentivize the full value chain. And elaborating on what Fabio just said, it would be probably absurd to support the C to the detriment of the U or vice versa. So we have to make sure that the value chain is supported, that there is a business case for alternative product, including e-fuels. This is what is at stake. We had already conversation with the co-legislators during the making of the ETS. We know there are other stakeholders that do not necessarily share the same view. So it's very important that we put all the people around the same table and we guarantee that at least we have a business case and a value chain which is very well performing to help achieve the climate goal. Thank you.
And last but not least, Claudia, Berlin.
Yeah, thank you. I have not much more to add because so much has already been said. I fully share your views that we have to look into more in depth into options how to incentivize CCU, as I said, and what role the waste management sector can play in that. I'm also happy or will be happy to share your views, Fabio, why you think it could be better to have the waste streams in sort of an upstream system like the ETS2 than in the ETS1 sector. Not sure if I really got that. But thanks for the ideas and thoughts that have been shared today, and looking forward to future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you all very much. Look, I'm sure what I heard is some of them great ideas, some of them you kind of, well, this is not going to happen. But it is a reflection, it is ideas, and this is what think tanks do. I think we have our own ideas, and the regulator or the institution regulator, whatever you want to call it, and the stakeholder will have their own different ideas. But we are all here presumably to come up with better mousetrap. And the better mousetrap comes from if you want, a pollination of ideas. And as a think tank, we hope that we are contributing to this debate. So again, thank you very much. Thank you very much for even attempting to read the 105 pages. But the only promise we can make is that the next one is not going to be 105. So we'll learn our lesson. So thank you again. And well, listen, as somebody else said, we'll be back. Thank you.